Archives of Prasar Bharati presents the timeless treasure of golden era.
How to describe Dr. Malcolm S. Adiseshiah? This has been a dilemma. Do I call him a great son of Tamil Nadu, a great Indian, or an internationally renowned civil servant who has served the interests of more than 100 countries, who has contributed richly to the amelioration of the lot of the poor, especially in their needs of improving their literacy standards in terms of looking at their cultural and educational needs? Do I describe Dr. Malcolm S. Adiseshiah as an outstanding economist whose views are sought time and again to look at the economic issues of the country? Or do I describe Dr. Malcolm Adiseshiah as a civil servant who has had a distinguished career at the United Nations Scientific, Educational, Cultural Organization, UNESCO for short, for nearly 2 decades? Or do I describe Dr. Malcolm as someone who has been having a keen interest in issues related to education? You may remember him as a distinguished Vice Chancellor of the University of Madras, who did a lot to revamp the university, which at some point of time seemed to have got stuck with tradition, a certain conservative trait, and released its energies to concentrate on research, on change of curricula, changing the whole lot of the examination system. You may also remember Malcolm as a distinguished member of the parliament. He was a member of the Rajya Sabha for one full term of 6 years. And many of us do remember the incisiveness he brought into economic issues and made it appear after all the parliament's discussions are not totally concerned with issues political or administration. And of course, Malcolm is remembered in our times for the greatest contribution of his, I believe, of instituting the Madras Institute of Development Studies. For setting it up, his wife and he have made a munificent contribution of a good portion of their properties. Not merely that, a regular contribution of a good portion of his pension. And the listeners will naturally understand my difficulty in trying to unravel the greatness of this man in his various manifestations. I am trying to discuss the various aspects of it, of Malcolm S. Adiseshiah, the man, his evolution, and his times. Naturally, listeners will be keen to know about the early days of Malcolm, the time in which he was born and he was brought up. He has seen the tremendous sea change that has taken place over these years. He has also richly contributed to these changes in various fields. Doctor, I would like you to reminisce in the early days of yours a little about your parents, their background, and the interest they inculcated in you to evolve as a full citizen. Dr. Malcolm S. Adiseshiah.
I think I'll begin first. A name which is rather unusual for a Tamilian. The responsibility for the name, all of us, the 4 brothers and 1 sister, was with the mother, who was a strong man or strong mistress of the family. My father laid only one condition, that is that every one of us should have at least one Indian name. Well, my name referred to the first word Malcolm was taken by my mother from a very dear friend who's a little bit of a saint, an English priest who was working then in Madras in the YMCA, I think, Robert YMCA, called Canon Malcolm Goldsmith. And she, in her admiration for him, took that first name, made him my godfather, and that's how I got my first name. My second name, S, stands for Satyanathan. This is what my father insisted on. My elder brother was among the names. He had Varanasi. My next younger brother had the name Anantaya. My youngest brother had the name Subramaya. And my sister has the name of Padmini. Now, the Satyanathan goes back to my great-grandfather, who was Reverend W.T. Satyanathan, who was in charge of this Zion Church in Chendaripet for over 35 years. That's where I also worship today. Now, Adiseshiah, of course, is my father's name. All of us decided to follow the English custom of having at the end of our name the father's name
as a family name.
And when I think of this Adiseshiah, I think of a institute. My institute runs every year an interdisciplinary seminar for the professors of southern universities. It was 1976 or 1977. We had a seminar. It was in Hyderabad, Osmania College, located there. And there, introducing me as one of the speakers the chairman of the meeting of the session was the great sociologist from Mysore University, Paradama, who was herself from the scheduled castes. And she said, introduced me, look at this man, Adiseshiah, he's become a Christian, but he still keeps his name Adiseshiah, reference to the fact that we are so strongly caste-minded. Now, I think that my birth was in Madras technically because my mother's parents were there, and following the usual custom, she used to come to Madras
for delivery.
For delivery. And almost immediately to come back, I lived my whole life up to my intermediate course, which I think was of 14 years, 15 years.
Till about mid-1920s.
Yes.
Right.
In Vellore, my school was the school, there were two great schools there. One was founded by the American missionaries called Woori's High School. The other was the Mahant High School. Both were very good institutions, and it was very good that we had these two because it meant that they had to compete with each other to keep up certain standards, certain values, and so on. Now, I had quite an uneventful school career, except I think I had what is called a double promotion.
You say that uneventful, doctor?
Well, and therefore, when I passed high school. There was this school final SSLC exam, a little before 12 years.
You mean before you were 12?
Before I was 12.
Right? That means 11 years of education completed when you were just 12.
Yes. And, we had a rule then, I don't know if they still have it, that you had to be 14 years to enter college, intermediate. So there was also provision for exceptions, and I applied for an exception and got it. And looking back at my school career, I think that what impressed me most was the personality of our teachers there. The history teacher who suffered from leprosy but bravely carried on. The mathematics teacher was one of the outstanding mathematicians who was partially blind. And the English teacher had one difficulty because my father was Telugu Brahmin, who became a Christian when he was 14 years old. I remember we children asked him, what made you become a Christian? And he said, when I was 14 years old, attending the school, I think that it was Madanapalli, it was a Christian missionary school. I had been following very carefully the Bible lessons. And I was very impressed with the life of Jesus Christ. And what made me change was words that he said, there is no other name except mine for the way to God. And in fact, he said that he quoted this in the court when his parents were court.
Understandably, they objected.
Judge asked him, what made you become Christian? And he quoted this verse.
You said he was only 14?
Only 14. And therefore, judgment would have been that he was a minor who couldn't choose. And it would have been, it's almost on that point, return to parents. And so the missionaries very cleverly put him on the Colombo boat mail, sent him off to Ceylon. And so he lived in Ceylon till he became, I think, 18 or something. Major. And had continued schooling there. Now, my mother, on the other hand, was Thuruvellala from Tranquebar. And we were in some difficulty with this because, on the one hand, the Brahmin community did not accept my father, having been Christian. And in those days, the Vellala community, among Christians, there were three castes. Vellalas, Nadars, and scheduled castes. And Vellalas didn't accept community because we were mixed. My family, Brahmin and Vellalas. So, in the midst of this situation, my parents brought us up rather carefully, trying to make us overcome caste feelings and so on. And it was good because we were isolated. If you ask me then, how did my father, a young Brahmin Christian, meet my mother, who was the granddaughter of W.T. Satyanathan, and her father was Reverend W.D. Clark, another great priest of Zion Church. In those days, there was a very good family called Mr. E.S. Hensman, who was superintendent in the secretariat here in Madras. And he had a very nice house called Lanka Lodge in Raipeta, St. Peter's Road it is now, just the back of the YMCA. And that became the house for Brahmins who became Christians. There were 6 or 7 of them who used to meet them because they were rather isolated. And so Mrs. Hensman suggested that my father's marriage to Reverend Clark, so he married my mother. Now,
it was also an arranged marriage, of course. In tradition of those days, right?
He wished to marry one of the Hensman girls, but they didn't want to do that, and so this arrangement was made. Now,
your father had also been a teacher also, right?
yes, my father was all his life a teacher. He finished his MA and LT.
Oh.
Those days, MA, LT, and he became a lecturer in Boris Intermediate College. His subject was philosophy. He took logic and English. Well, I was saying to you that one of our problems was my father being Telugu, my mother being Tamil. What we did at home as a compromise to speak half time in English and half the time in Tamil, Telugu, mostly in Tamil. Now, in relation to the school, difficulty with my English teacher in school was he was one of the brilliant people. He found that I was far ahead of the other students because we were speaking English also at home. And I was using some words which no school student at that age should be using. So he was spending most of his time with me trying to dissuade me from using certain words. See, this is why, for instance, one example, I used to say underneath the table. He said, no, say under the table.
Under the table.
Underneath it. This is the kind of thing that will happen. This still sticks in my mind. Now, I finished my high school, SSLC, with my second language then was neither Tamil nor Telugu. I took Sanskrit. And I finished with Sanskrit. Then I went into the intermediate.
Doctor, how was general campus life then like? When the day scholar, of course, but still the college would, even by then, would have had nearly 1,000 students or so, even at that point of time.
That's right. Well, I think that, first of all, campus life was very rich and full and was essentially an academic and sporting kind of life. We divided our time between academic pursuits and sports. And not only students, but also our teachers. The head of the department, I said, Father Basadak, he was one of the best tennis players in those days. And our life was that because life was simple, still simple, not complex. We had no distractions at all. There was no question of either adhering to any political activities of any kind or of our getting organized student unions and teachers unions, demanding this, demanding that from the university, from the colleges and from the government. No, this distraction we didn't have. From that point of view, you could say that it was a kind of peaceful but dull life. It didn't have the distractions we have today, which we'll come to later on. And it kind of reflected Madras. Madras at those times was beginning to come alive, but it's still very largely a kind of large Mufassil city compared to Delhi, Calcutta, Bombay. Mount Road was the main attraction. It was a broad avenue, and we used to go to where we would have to pass Mount Road
to reach the
to go to. But for instance, very often I used to go to the beach. We used to go to the beach, and the university library was also the university situated on the beach, Marina, and I used to go there. Another attraction that the Marina had for us young students was Women's College, Queen Mary's College, was at the end of the Marina. And so we men students used to go there very often, cycling, not doing anything, just cycling past and hoping to see some girls. And
there wouldn't have been many women students in those times.
Oh, yes. Because don't forget, there's a composite state of Madras in those days.
Oh, yes.
There are Malayalis, there are Telugus, Kannadas.
Right.
And Tamilians.
It's a huge province.
And then we also had quite a mixture, quite a group of Anglo-Indians and some very few Europeans also studying. Because in those days, the studies were very...
You mentioned about Mount Road. What was the type of commercial or economic activity then?
Well, it was a very beautiful place, highway. No, I shouldn't call it. It was a mall. It is a really walking kind of place. And on both sides of Mount Road, beautiful buildings built really by the British. And we had there the famous buildings of Spencer's, Peor's, Addison, Sons, Addison's and so on.
Higginbotham's, the bookstall was there. Right.
And very attractive. And we didn't have either skyscrapers or these shacks, one-story shacks which have become coffee stalls and hotels and so on. We didn't have all those things. So it was kind of very British.
Grandeur was there.
And a certain amount of graciousness there was about it.
That was how costly was living then, Doctor? You were as a student.
It was very, very cheap. I used to be able to live with, of course, living with my uncle. I used to pay him about 20 rupees a month, I think. And for lunch, the whole lunch outside, either in Lila College, in the canteen there, or in the canteen in the library. And for this, I never spent more than 10 rupees. Maximum was 10
In a
rupees.
month.
So life is very cheap. I mean, I think even those who are studying presidency colleges spend more than 50 rupees a month.
The level of poverty that you noticed then, how does it compare with what you see now?
Well, I was telling you in all frankness, I didn't realize the level of poverty. I didn't go into it, though as an economist, economics man, a student. And so I cannot really say how that time's poverty compares with today's. Now, I'd like to come back to where I we left off. That is, I told you I did so well, and I got a first class in my honors. And those days, Madras University was the number one university in India. And to have a first class in Madras University attracted a lot of attention.
It's a passport anywhere.
And so I got 6 requests from 6 colleges, from Calcutta, Delhi, Bombay, Nagpur, Hyderabad, Malta, to accept a job as a lecturer in economics. I was only becoming MA next year. You know that the system we had was automatically you became honors, without doing any further work. MA the next.
The syllabus is the same.
So I then reflect very hard. And then I decided I'll go to Calcutta. I chose the Calcutta University offer for one reason, and that is several reasons, but one main reason is I wanted to be near Rabindranath Tagore, because I had heard about Tagore, I had read his poems and his statements and so on, deeply moved by them, but also I was interested in his rural economic reconstruction demonstration program that he established next to his Shantiniketan University in a group of villages called Sriniketan. Because by this time I was becoming conscious of the fact that the economics that I had learned and the economic theory that I had acquired had really no relation to the conditions in our country. I did not have the quantitative data on poverty, but the fact that we had mass of us, people were poor, this was there, and I found that economics is not dealing at all with this problem. And so I was very interested in, and the fact also is that the economic principles that we studied was very largely urban. And India, as Gandhiji said, lives in its villages. At that time, 80% of India was rural. Even today, 70% is rural. And economics that I had learned, had no relation. So I was interested to see what was Tagore trying to do, what was he doing?
It's extremely fascinating, Doctor, in the sense we have often found that people from this region have not very much attended to applied economics as we later came to know. It's fascinating that as early as in the 20s, you thought about this and thought it fit to migrate as far away as Calcutta. You joined the Calcutta University?
Yes, I said this main reason. The other reasons were, I give second reason, that some of our top people like Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan, Dr. K.S. Krishnan, Dr. Raman,
C.V. Raman,
all these people were there. Had been there, and so it became a kind of intellectual center for India at that time, Calcutta University. Really top people were there. In economics field, we had a man called Binoy Ranjan Sarkar, who was a name to conjure with. And I found then that the Bengalis used to use a phrase which summarized the situation for me. They say, what Bengal thinks today, rest of India will think tomorrow. It sounded a little boastful, but it is actually true. It was a stimulating intellectual compared to Madras. Calcutta was really stimulating. All the top economists were there. They'd all been trained in London School of Economics, a few in Cambridge and Oxford. And they used to meet regularly, and I used to hear from them. And I realized, first of all, that my economic theory and principles that I had acquired were still very elementary compared to what they were talking about. Sometimes I couldn't even follow what they were saying. Then I was teaching, however, my economics is enough to teach my students for
BA. What was the subject you were teaching them?
I was teaching economics. Economic principles of economics and public finance. And we had, like in Madras, about 50 students doing the pass course, economics, and a smaller group of about 15 or 20 doing advanced economics, which is called BA with honors, not BA honors. They didn't. BA with honors, they would be working out, because they would have to take 2 extra papers. For the higher knowledge of economics.
It's also the same duration, 2 years.
2 years.
But they have to get a certain percentage marks more.
That's right. And two additional papers.
Papers.
Then I went with then what I did was I formed this be the honest students, the 15 people. And then we couldn't say no to some 5 or 6 others in the past. We used to go certainly went every month, but sometimes we used to go thrice a month during the weekends, Saturdays and Sundays, because we didn't work on Saturdays in the college. We used to go from Calcutta to Shantiniketan, which was a 6-hour train journey, Sriniketan, and spend the weekend there and watch what the group dedicated, committed economists, agronomists, scientists, engineers, and educators were doing with the villagers, working with the villagers. They were making them, of course, get rid of illiteracy, because with that literacy they couldn't do anything. And then improving their farming, their cattle, poultry, and some minor industries, handlooms and
sericulture, animal husbandry, things like that.
So this is what we watched.
This was experimented in the 20s, as early as in the 20s, right?
You know that I think that Gandhiji used to come there very often, stay there with Tagore and so on. I think that Gandhiji's constructive program certainly was very close to this. And I do not know whether Gandhiji received this inspiration on the constructive program from Tagore's Sriniketan. Because he's written about this to Tagore and so on, very highly praising this, saying this is the way that India and Indian students, Indian universities should go forward.
Sporadically, this was attempted, Doctor. In Gujarat, for instance, they attempted this type of rural reconstruction work. And again in down south in Tiruchengodu, Rajaji did it in the late 20s and early 30s. But unfortunately, these by and large, remained as models. They were not writ large on the nation as such. Coming back to the Sriniketan experiment, you said the professors actually lived in the villages to look at the improvement of the standards of living, right?
There were permanent staff, professorial staff, professors in readers grade, of about 6, I think. Then the rest were people who used to come, experts used to come in from Calcutta University, from the colleges and so on, and help in the development of the village.
We now attribute many of these things as not capable of doing because of want of money. How was that managed in those days?
Well, I think that first of all, Tagore was able to raise enough money. We didn't have any problem with money. And what that showed was, it showed me a number of... First, it showed me that what is needed is not money, not equipment, but commitment. Once you have a commitment, you want to see that poverty is eradicated, that you do something about it, you can do it. Then the second thing was to see how education, literacy can be used, how this could be improved in order to bring about the kind of village life that we want to see.
You did see a lot of expansion of this concept into other villages around?
No. In fact, I think that would be one of the criticisms we would have. And I think when you isolated experiments, devastation, that is right. This was kind of, unlike Shantiniketan, which flowed out to other learning centers, Sriniketan did not. And I was not bothered about that, because I felt that learn what is being done there and see how this related to what I had learned as economics. And I must say to you that there's absolute no relation. Absolute no. Now, my economic theory, my economic principles did not help me to any way to understand, to analyze, and to certainly remedy or solve the problems that we were confronted with there. So the two things were left in my mind in Calcutta. I stayed 5 years. So first was this, that there needs to be some kind of bridge, because the theory and practice are so wide apart. Secondly, listening to the group in Calcutta University, the professors and so on, I decided I must go to London in order to improve my principles. I knew that it's not application, but even my theory was very limited, primitive. So I applied to go to London. And
one question, Doctor. How was life in Calcutta? How did it differ from what you saw in Madras?
Well, Calcutta's life was much more complex, much fuller than Madras. Madras was a simple life. There we had theatres, we had music festivals, we had poetry festivals, and lectures, lectures and seminars. In Madras, it was almost lectures. It was intellectually arid. Madras was at that time.
Social life and in other aspects, living and the level of commercial activity, things like that. It was
commercial activities, of course. Calcutta was the center of those days, center of commerce, not Bombay, not Delhi. Very active. And some of the top economic practitioners, banking, commerce and agriculture and so on, were from Calcutta, Bengal. And in fact, I noticed even then, that the Dhaka University professors, economists, were much better than even Calcutta University.
Oh.
And I was torn between whether I should spend a period of, say, 3 to 4 years in Dhaka or should I go to London. And finally I decided, everybody said, you're young, this is the time for you to go. And having taught for 5 years, I knew what I wanted. And so I applied to London School of Economics. And in those days, we had to do this through India House, in the India office.
India
House. And they got me admitted into the London School of Economics. And I was admitted into the PhD program. I had to choose a subject.
How was it funded, Doctor?
I went by boat, tourist class boat. It was very cheap. It was about £70 or something.
Took nearly 3 to 4 weeks?
Took 3 weeks. Took 3 weeks. Taken 4 weeks if I had gone all the way by boat. What I did, I got off at Marseille and went by train to London. So that I cut off 1 week.
Your father was active then. He approved of your going out?
Yes. My father, he let us alone. We were, elder brother and I were already earning and so on. So he let us alone. And my monthly expenses, first 2 years or 1.5 years, I was able to manage very economically out of my own savings that I had made when I was a lecturer in Calcutta University. For 1.5 years, it kept me going. So I got a job. But now, going back to London School of Economics, I was fascinated by that because there again, we had the great names like Lionel Robbins on the economics sector, Lionel Robbins, Frederick Hayek, T. Gregory, and my fellow students were at that time Arthur Lewis, Rosenstein, and told you the other day, the man who came here,
Calder,
Nick Calder, they're all my fellow PhDs. We were all now, and then we had Lasky, of course, Bronowski, and so on.
What was the status of Keynes then?
No, Keynes was in Cambridge.
Right.
He used to come down to London, or we used to go there. Now, I had a little problem.
You said you were straight away admitted for the PhD course, right?
Yes. But then somebody in the registrar's office or somewhere discovered that a Madras MA, Indian University MA, is not recognized as entrance for PhD. It is recognized as an entrance for London University MSc course. Economic MSc.
But though the syllabus and other things were modeled on the British in our own universities.
But I think they were right. Because I attended their MSc classes also, voluntarily. In order to learn more, and it was much higher level. What they were talking about, we would never understand. The textbooks, the books they were using, they didn't use Marshall. They used the originals that Marshall had used in order to develop his principles. So the director called me and said, "I'm sorry, we made a mistake. You can't register for a PhD. So we are reverting you to MSc." So I said, "Well, I'm very sorry. It's bad luck. Means the purpose I came here for is not going to realize, or I'll have to stay longer." And I found that on this basis, I stayed there for 1 month. After a month, my professor, each one of us has a professor. Professor Percy Barrett Vale went to the academic council. They have a little academic council saying, "Look here, this man Adiseshiah, you put under me to do his MSc, is far above MSc level. He should be in the PhD." And so, after a month, they transferred me back again to PhD.
How within that month you submitted so many papers?
No, I used to attend seminars.
And
I used to write a couple of papers, everything and so on. And the question and answers, we used to meet also. Teachers would meet there. Unlike India, where there was a tremendous reverence for teachers, but there was no teacher-student interaction. There's a very close interaction. Each student was meeting one or more teachers every week. And we'll spend 2 hours. He'll be smoking a pipe. We will have given a paper and he'll, examine us minutely on what this means, what that word means, where we got this information from. And in this way, there was both intellectual richness developing and this symbiotic relationship between teachers and students, which is in great contrast to what was in Indian universities at that time, my experience here. Now, after getting admitted to PhD, and
what is the subject you chose?
I chose was seasonal variations in the demand for money. The reason why I chose were two. First was John Maynard Keynes had just come out with this classic General Theory of Employment, Interest, Money, and so on.
And I read through that, reflected on it, and felt I must write something related to this on money. And the second thing that influenced me was, when I was here in India, I noticed that our interest rates varied tremendously between
The busy and
busy
the
season
rain
and
seasons.
season. And so this is what is the reason for interest rates, and of course back with supply of money and demand for money and so on. So I said this needs to be, and nobody had done this.
Oh.
This was a subject which had not been touched upon. So I decided to take this up, and I went and consulted my guide, Professor Vale, and he said that's a very good subject.
This
So
is
I did.
All India
And
Radio
my
Archives
main
recording.
original source, it was a library work. It was not field work. Library work was to get from the India Office Library, as well as the London Square, the back numbers of our journal, our newspapers, Hindu, Statesman, Times of India, and I don't know which economic journal exists in those days.
Capital?
Capital, that's right, which has gone out of existence. Now, I think from these I extracted, I sat down and worked. I used to work from morning, and this is a library program, see? So I had no lectures. I decided then and I had to sit and collect this data